start sitting by Barbara, and he can follow you. Good, glad you're here. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're welcome to bring coffees or iced tea in here, and the restrooms are just right behind us in the hallway there. So if we drink too much coffee and iced tea, feel free, you can walk out there. Joe's going to give you a couple breaks, so I'll let you know a little bit about how we got here. We're really glad to have you here. Joe's been a friend of mine and a colleague for years and years now in the California State Guard. That's how I got to know him. He's a career, and he'll explain his career a little bit, a career law enforcement officer. He's a veteran from the United States Navy and the California State Guard, and he's been through some critical incidents. So what gets us here is the incident he talks about is no different than an incident that you'll go through. It may be a completely different incident. It may not, I'm not going to tell you what he's going to tell you, but it may be an incident that was caused by something completely different, but we all arrive at the same kind of place. So through his experiences, he's going to share some of the information of how he went through that incident, what it did to him, what changed, and then how we can all learn from that. So with that, I'm not going to go too much further. My good friend and colleague, Joe Flannagan, and she's turning his little transponder on there, so his body pack is on.
Okay.
And
can you hear me now?
I'm not going to say what it is, but Joe, welcome to Grace Hills. We're glad you're here. Thank you for giving this presentation.
Thank you. Full disclosure, this is the first time this presentation's ever been given outside of a small group of survivors of slain law enforcement officers. So thank you very much for having me here today. I wouldn't be able to be here today if it wasn't for this young lady right here. This is my wife, Barbara. She has never seen this program. She was asking all kinds of questions about it coming up here. We drove up yesterday from Orange County. So she was asking questions about it, and I was trying to be specifically vague because I didn't want to give too much of it away. Some of the things that she's going to see, she's never seen before. Some of the stories that she's going to hear about, she's not been told about. So this evening, I'm sure I'll get the inside critique as to how good or bad or however it went. I want to thank you for letting me be here. As Dave mentioned, we met in the California State Guard several years ago. 3 years ago, I was his instructor when he came through advanced leadership, and I was the course manager. This last year, we were classmates in the senior leadership course, and then he went to the dark side, and he's now an officer in the State Guard. So he no longer works for a living. He gives orders and has somebody else do his work for him. What we're going to talk about is surviving a critical incident. The first slide, this is one of the walls that's at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. On that wall are over 26,000 names of law enforcement officers that have been killed in the line of duty. 10 times that are survivors of critical incident. Police officers that have been critically hurt in the line of duty and survived and stuff like that. I am an ambassador for the National Memorial. That's one of the hats that I wear. And all that means is I get to go around, I get to talk about the memorial and what it does for people, and how it helps families and how it helps the law enforcement community throughout the nation and throughout the world. In May is always our National Police Week, and we'll talk about that more later on because I'm involved in a little physical exercise that I'll be doing in May. Next slide, please. This is my life in one slide. I wanted to try and tone it down a little bit. This is my public service life. I started in the United States Navy in 1973, and I got off active duty active Naval Reserve in 1979. Those are my two squadrons. When I was at sea, I was aboard the USS Constellation, and my squadron was VF-92. We had F-4 Phantoms. That picture is somewhere in the South China Sea. I'm not allowed to say that I'm a Vietnam vet. because I was only in the South China Sea in 74, 75, 76. And it was no longer a combat zone, so I am not a Vietnam vet, but I have been to into the South China Sea and Southeast Asia several times. The reason I have the picture up there is you look up in the lower left-hand corner, you see a person in a white shirt. That's what I did. I worked flight deck. I was a flight deck troubleshooter for my squadron. And then I was hired as a police officer in 1977 with the Alhambra Police Department. And I worked there 37 years. I retired as a lieutenant. I worked every division, almost every division within the police department, except motors. You could not get me on a motorcycle. I had a hard time keeping 4 wheels on the ground, much less 2. But I retired as a lieutenant out of the investigations division. I was the bureau commander my last 5 years. I worked on a few well-known cases. Anybody here ever heard of Phil Spector, the music producer? I was the investigating officer that took that to trial. Richard Ramirez, ever heard of him? Night Stalker. I did several searches for Richard Ramirez. A few other things we had within my 37-year tenure with the police department. I retired when they said I had to go back to graveyard. At 57 years old, I did not want to go back to graveyard. So I said 37 years is enough, and I retired and then went to work for the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, Bureau of Investigation, where I am now a detective. And I am assigned to the Long Beach Court, and I work for 6 to 8 deputy district attorneys as their detective. Assist with trial prep, interviewing witnesses, tracking down witnesses. I spent a lot of time walking up and down the LA riverbed, looking for homeless people that have either been victims or witnesses to crimes to try and get them to court. And then I joined the California Guard in 2011, and I came in on the Army side because at the time there was no naval component. It had been stood down in the late 50s, and in 2017 they stood it back up again. So I transferred over to the naval side of the State Guard. It's called Maritime, and I'm now a Chief Petty Officer in the Maritime component. And my unit is part of the DET South, Maritime Support Group South, and I am just recently the new Logistics and Supply Chief. For the last 2 years, I've been assigned to headquarters in Sacramento, and my job there was I was the weather officer for the state. That before any unit deployed, as far as on the water, anything to do with the water, anything like that, I had to do a weather brief for that unit. And I had to do those monthly for every unit before they went out and drilled. And I apologize. I meant to start with something. Can all the veterans please raise your hand? Thank you. Okay, you're my heroes. Okay, I very much respect and honor your service, and that's part of the reason why I'm here today. So let's go to the next slide. This program is sponsored by the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund Ambassador Program, Special Topics and Training. This program is authorized by the National Memorial. That's why it has their logo on it, and it's under the Special Topics Training category. Next, please. Go ahead and play this.
Every day, some 800,000 law enforcement officers across our nation put their lives on the line for our safety and protection. Their job is difficult and dangerous. On average, an officer is killed in the line of duty somewhere in America every 53 hours. We owe all of these brave men and women a huge debt of gratitude. In 1991, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. was dedicated to honor and remember the sacrifices of the fallen and their families. The memorial walls will bear the names of 19,000 officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice. We must never forget those heroes, nor the men and women who now follow in their footsteps. Please join me and get involved today.
That was, Mr. Eastwood did that film about 6 years ago. He is our national spokesman for our memorial. The memorial is comprised of 3 pillars: honoring our fallen, our museum, and if you ever have an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and visit the Law Enforcement Museum, it's pretty amazing. It's underground. It sits in Judiciary Square, and when you walk in, you go down a flight of stairs, and there's a helicopter hanging there. And that helicopter was the very first police helicopter used in rescues in Washington area. With the, was it American Airlines that crashed into the Potomac way back then? In December or January, and the helicopter, which had a pilot and a co-pilot, pulled people out of the river, while the co-pilot was standing on the skids, pulling people out of the water, frozen water. That's how the museum starts. But anyway, and then the third pillar is wellness, officer safety and wellness, and making it safer for those who serve. That's where I come in. Next slide, please. And just basically what we do. That's pretty self-explanatory. Next slide, please. Now we get into what is a critical incident. And this is kind of an open forum. If something is not up here that you think should, please let me know and I will add it as to what a critical incident is for you. It's physical injury, loss of a spouse, loss of a friend, loss of a colleague. All these I've experienced. Loss of a subordinate. We'll talk about that in a minute. Separation and divorce. Attack on 9/11. The impact it had on us. Personal attack or combat. I've been in combat on the streets. I worked the LA riots. I've been in numerous fights. Back in the start of my career, you knew on a Friday, Saturday night, you were going to get in a fight. In Los Angeles County, in the late 70s, early 80s, can you remember what the drug of choice was? LSD, I believe. PCP. We call them dusters. You knew that every night you were going to be in a fight. In fact, so much so that law enforcement at the time, we used the carotid upper body control hold. The press calls it a chokehold. It's not a chokehold, okay? But it's a control hold. We used it right after hello. As soon as we got into a confrontation, we used it. I probably used it 400 times plus. And it's saved my life and saved me from injuries and probably saved our suspects' lives. But, so that's combat, personal combat. Pandemic, what we all just went through, loss of employment, huge in the public safety sector. When a police officer, firefighter loses their job, huge problem. Loss of self-esteem and self-worth and financial issues. Anything that I might be leaving off that would be a critical incident for you that you could think of? Pardon me? Okay, next slide. The first step of surviving an event is physically surviving it. And that's often due to the credit of others. We don't often save ourselves. Firefighters, other police officers, search and rescue personnel, doctors, and nurses. Chances are those are the people that are responsible for us surviving a critical incident. Next. The second step is mental recovery. This is the hardest step of all, okay? Getting that next step, going to that next level, and living through the incident, whatever it might be. You get through it through your family and friends, mental health professionals and counselors, priests, ministers, faith-based social groups. Let me back up here again for mental health professionals and counselors, okay? Back when I started my career, mental health in law enforcement was like a career ender, absolute career ender. If your employer thought that you had a mental issue, can you have any idea what they would do to you? Take your gun, take your self-worth, which is your identification, and just farm you out and forget about you. Okay? And oftentimes they would try and force retire you, which has a stigma all unto itself. And so back in my day, mental health help was limited at best. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit because it plays into my presentation and stuff. So just keep that in your mind. Okay, next please. This is my story. I've been a police officer over 48 years. I've been injured several times in the line of duty. I've been in 3 officer-involved shootings. I worked the '84 Olympics, which, by the way, was the best time ever to be in LA. I don't have no idea what the '28 Olympics are going to be like, okay? Because LA is a mess right now. But in '84, it was the best time to be a police officer. I got to work some of the best sites, see some great events, and you know how many law enforcement related incidents there were during the 3 weeks of the Olympics? Anyone want to guess? 1, the very last day. Out of all that with the world coming to Los Angeles, it was awesome. And LA was beautiful. It was clean. There were no homeless. People got along. It was a giant group hug with about 10 million people. Lost friends and colleagues through line of death. Several of my friends are on the wall in Washington, D.C. that I worked with, I knew. And I thought that was a tough point in my life until I had a very good friend of mine commit suicide, one of my partners. And this goes back to mental health and being afraid of having your integrity taken away, having your livelihood taken away. And it was a real simple thing. He got into an argument with his daughter. And because he was going through a divorce, on and off again marriage, his wife said, "I'm going to call the police department and tell them you beat us up." He couldn't handle that because this was at the beginning of all the domestic violence stuff. And and I'm not criticizing the domestic violence laws because they're needed, but when they first started, we kind of went overboard with law enforcement, where we arrested everybody. There was no gray area. And my friend couldn't handle that. And he left the house and drove up onto Foothill Boulevard in above Ontario and ate his gun. It hit us like a ton of bricks. We had never had an officer commit suicide before. It hit us like an absolute ton of bricks. And it took us a long while to get over that. And then I lost an officer, Officer Ryan Stringer. Barb had met him, and I got the call on a Sunday morning. And what this was, when you're a young fire breather and you want your officers doing that. I was a patrol sergeant, and when Ryan was killed, I was the detective sergeant, but I just went into bureau, but I supervised him in patrol. But you have young officers, and you want them with their hair on fire. You want them getting to the ruckus, get to the call, get to the thing, solve it, and move on to the next one. And what this was, 2 young officers with their hair on fire going to a robbery in progress call at about 1:30 in the morning in our downtown area where the bars are and stuff like that, where the bars were closing. And one officer is going one way and another officer is going another way across the red light. It was a millisecond, timing-wise. Roughly minimum speed of impact for one officer was 80 miles an hour and the other was over 100. And they T-boned each other. The surviving officer was thrown through the windshield, wound up on a planter on Main Street. Ryan was sent up the street and he was halfway out of the car when they found him. And he died about 3 hours later at Huntington Memorial. He was 28. Just a dynamic kid. And again, it hit us like a ton of bricks. What do we do? How do we get beyond this? And when you work in law enforcement, especially if you work for a small department, and I'm sure the same thing is up here with your small community, when you lose somebody important, it hits you so hard and you just wonder, how am I going to get through this? What's it going to take and stuff? And the way we got through it, by that time we had counseling. We had Dr. Larry Blum. We had Dr. I can't remember her name. I'll think of it here in a minute. But we had counselors, crisis counselors. By that time, it became normal to use crisis counselors in law enforcement and public safety for critical instances. Next, please. Okay, we're going to get down and we're going to take a break here in about 10 minutes after I show you something. This is, I call it the incident. And I have to give special recognition to the people that saved my life. The Alhambra Police Department, the officers, the Alhambra Fire Department. At that time, Alhambra Fire Department did not have paramedics. They were all EMTs. Paramedics were, LA City had paramedics, Monterey Park had paramedics, South Pasadena had paramedics, Pasadena, but Alhambra, San Gabriel, we just had EMTs. So the Monterey Park Fire Department, they responded. South Pasadena Fire Department, their paramedics are the ones that saved my life. And I said Monterey Park Police Department. Next, please. Okay, this is a synopsis of the incident. They tell me it was July 28, 1988. And the reason I say that is because I have no memory of it. To this day, I have no memory of what I'm about to show you. It's roughly almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Suspect robs, at the time, there was no such thing as a carjacking. Back then, we called it a robbery and a GTA, Grand Theft Auto. It occurred at 7-Eleven store at Chapel and Mission. The first 911 call came in at 01:57 hours. At 01:59 hours, 2 minutes later, the 911 call comes in of a gentleman at Glendon and Almanzar saying, "Hey, I got a police car upside down in my front yard." And that was me. The suspect, in less than 2 minutes, traveled 1.4 miles on city streets. And the CHP estimated minimum speed of impact was 79 miles an hour. What's unique about it, and when you see the video, is the suspects went airborne. They were going eastbound on Glendon, hit a rain dip, and went airborne. As they were going east, I was going north. The suspect vehicle came in the driver's window and hit me in the head. One of the things that saved my life was I had a roll bar in my car because I was a dog handler. And we had a cage in the back, and I had one of those race car, NASCAR type roll bars in the car that held the dog cage in place. It bent that roll bar almost 8 to 10 inches in. The driver's door is laying across the seat when it hit me. One of the things that's a cardinal rule that we don't do now is drive without seatbelts on. Had I had the seatbelt on, I would have been killed instantly, or I would have stayed dead. It allowed me to be thrown across the car. And when you'll see them taking me out of the car, I'm up underneath the dashboard of the unit. And I say that you're going to see it is because I'm about to show you the unedited press coverage of them cutting me out of the car. It's a little noisy. You'll hear some people talking. You'll see my dog get taken out by one of my partners. And then we'll discuss the crash after I show you the video. Next, please.
Ray, do you want our guys to relieve you guys on traffic? I got some parking tickets right now. You don't need it? Thank you. Get out of the way. got my line, right? Those are two. Those are lights on the car. And a piece. Blue green light there.
TSP officer just asked the acting patrol sergeant if I was alive, because he did not anticipate me surviving. No one did. Practicing a little bit of graveyard humor, which my wife says I have a terminal case of. Did you see anything funny? Sometimes you have to find the humor in things, okay? First of all, when they brought me out of, cut me out of the car and had me on the backboard, cut me out of my uniform, okay? What kind of underwear was I wearing? Boxers. What's the biggest flaw with boxers?
They're not very tight.
They're not very tight, and the fly is always open. If you notice, the fly was closed. I don't know if a fireman did me a solid or not, but the fly is closed. Another part is they put me on the gurney backwards. You saw that? Again, you got to find the humor in things, okay? This video is how my parents were notified. My father, my parents were living in San Diego at the time, and my father would get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and watch the news before he went to work, and this video was on the 6 o'clock news. And he said, an Alhambra police officer, they didn't identify me, but he said, an Alhambra police officer has been critically injured, blah, 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 and stuff like that. And my dad saw my picture. So that's how he was. Again, this is in the 80s, okay? Things were a lot different back then. Notifications and, stuff like that. Things were handled quite differently and stuff. So this is how he was notified, or my mother and father were notified. A very good friend of mine was down from Sacramento. One of the hats I wore is I was a union representative on the state level for our state police union, and he was in Sacramento. I'm sorry, he was down in LA doing some lobbying work, and he saw it on the news. So he called Sacramento and says, hey, guess what? Joe Flannagan is on life support at Huntington Memorial Hospital, blah, 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 blah. Okay? These were my critical injuries. Okay, I was in a coma and I was on life support for 3 days. Fractured vertebrae in my neck, fractured skull, brain concussion. At that time, TBI was, nobody knew what that was and stuff. All the ribs on my left side were broken, and you saw him lay my vest on my chest when he laid me on the gurney. The vest played a great role in my survival because it held my body together, because the vests are very tight and stuff. So that helped hold all the jello together. Bruised and dislodged heart. Because all the ribs were broken on my left side, my heart was sitting outside of its cavity. Nobody knew that, but it was sitting outside the heart cavity. Collapsed left lung and cardiac arrest and CPR and defibrillated twice. I can tell you that if you're defibrillated, it does burn, okay? Because I woke up and when I eventually woke up, I had these marks on my chest. The firefighters did not know all my ribs were broken when they were doing CPR on me. But you do what you gotta do. I only have, let me go one more slide, please. These are my non-critical injuries. 3 compressed discs in my lower back, and I've already had 2 back surgeries since then. Separated right shoulder, I've had 3 surgeries. Compression fracture of my right hip and femur. Torn ligaments in both knees, and just minor cuts and bruises. Now, out of that entire incident, I have, I think, 3 memories. I don't remember the crash at all. But I remember, one of the first things I remember is one of my trainers when I was in the academy, a gentleman by the name of Bob Smithson, Captain Bob Smithson. LAPD captain, he was a SWAT commander. Him and his partner basically invented the SWAT teams, the concept of the SWAT teams. But he was my physical fitness instructor and officer survival instructor in the academy. And he's a man that made me look like a dwarf. He was a huge, huge man. Could outrun me, outrun most anybody, out weightlift, out fight, and stuff. But he used to stand over us when we would do push-ups or sit-ups, and he would stand over us and yell at us, get up off the ground. Never let and I won't say what we would call him, win. Okay? Never let him win. Get off the ground, get off the ground. I remember that. I remember him telling me to get up off the ground and stuff in the back of my brain. I remember them, I guess I was in the trauma unit at Huntington, and the doctor sliced my left side open and reached inside and pushed my heart back, and then put tubes in almost every orifice. And that's memory number 3, when they put a catheter in me. For men, I tell you, if that'll wake a dead man, that will wake a dead man. Okay? That hurts. And I'm sorry, I had four memories. Going down a white corridor. Don't know what it was, but I remember going down a white, cold corridor. They could have been wheeling me through hallways or whatever, but I don't know. But that's the only memories I have of the incident. And I woke up 3 days later. They did not expect me to get off life support. One of the things that saved my life, or saved my career, next slide, see if I have it in there. This is how I survived the injuries. One of it, the 6th button-down neurosurgeons. I have brilliant neurosurgeons, a beautiful trauma team, all SC trained trauma surgeons. Fortunately, the orthopedic surgeon was a friend of mine. So when he got the call and he came to Huntington Memorial, he said, "That's my patient. Nothing happens with him without going through me first." And that was a lifesaver. And that was Dr. Patrick Plunkett. But he talked to the neurosurgeon, and one of the things that saved my career was that they did not put me in a halo. You know what that is? And so had they put me in a halo, it would have been end of the road. I would have never, ever been able to recover to go back to work, because the doctors would never okay it because of the spinal injury. So what they did is they just put me in one of those hard collar things. But again, thanks to the Alhambra firefighters, South Pasadena firefighters, the brilliant doctors and nurses, exceptional ICU staff, the orthopedic surgeons, Dr. Patrick Plunkett, the neurosurgeons, numerous surgeries on both knees, lower back and right shoulder, and extensive traction, physical therapy, and physical fitness training. And we'll get into that a little bit later, because I'm very much into physical fitness training, but I can't do it like I used to, so now I ride a bike. Next, please. Again, memories of the incident. Before, none. Sometime during the incident, Captain Bob Smithson going down the white hallway, my left side of my chest being cut open, and a catheter being put in. So on that, why don't we take about 10 minutes, get up, get something to drink, and stretch your legs a little bit, because we have about another 40 minutes to go, and I don't want to overtire you.
You're welcome to leave anything. You're welcome to bring drinks back in here.
How was the dog? Oh, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. And just for full disclosure, I said that girl was my girlfriend at the time. That was in between her. Because she was my girlfriend before, and we went our separate ways. We were both too young to get too heavily involved. So she went her way, I went my way, and 20 years later, we got back together again, and now we've been married 18 years. Huh? No, full disclosure. Yes. There may be one in the door. I could use the restroom.
I am
Oh, okay.
and
Thank you.
fire department chaplain.
Oh, okay.
That's my ministry. I'm a pastor, but that's my ministry. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the stuff you can relate to.
No, absolutely.
Your mic is still on.
Oh my God.
All you were saying was okay, but I just thought I'd give you a heads up before you let you know.
You tell me when you're ready. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little. Somebody asked about my dog. He was my partner. I was single at the time, except for having a girlfriend. So that dog and I were together 24/7. I mean, we went on vacations together. We went houseboating together. I took him out on my boat. He was a German Shepherd, and his full name was Greif von der Wehre. He was from Germany. And people always ask, well, does your dog speak German? No, he doesn't speak German. He understood German, but he didn't speak German. I had Greif. He was my first dog, and I had him 8 years. And run, he did not survive. I had to put him down because his hips and shoulder were messed up pretty bad. But he was an 8-time world title holder that I had been to Germany with him in 83, 84, and 85 and competed in the world police trials, judged by German police and the German Shepherd Dog Club of Germany. And I earned 8 world titles on him. On a competition field, he was a robot dog. I could stand in the middle of the field, like say a football field size or a soccer field, and point, and he would go do all the stuff he was supposed to do and stuff like that. But bring him home and put him in the back seat of that police car. And he was a 4-legged land shark. In 8 years, we had 61 recorded bites. And back then, we used our dogs a lot differently than they do now. Everything was above board. I'm not saying we did anything wrong. I'm just saying we used them a lot more in a lot more instances, like crowd control, and things like that. But he was a robot dog. But Greif and I were together 24/7 for almost 8 years. And losing him was quite hurtful for me. Okay, the aftermath. The first 7 days, once I woke up on either the night of the 3rd day or the morning of the 4th day, once I woke up, I had tubes coming out of everything, drain tubes and stuff like that. And I had one of those magic button doohickey self-medicate. And I didn't know that if you keep hitting it, it doesn't do anything because it's on a regulator and stuff. And it was morphine. I kept trying to hit that morphine because I was hurting a lot. So on the night of the 7th day, they said, okay, we're going to take you out of ICU. You're going to survive. And so we're going to put you in a regular room. Okay, cool. As long as I keep my morphine, I'm good to go. So they put me in a regular room, and they on the morning of the 8th day, I asked for the morphine, and they said, nope, done. We're going to start giving you Tylenol and codeine. That's like drinking Coke your entire life and then being told you're going to drink Coke Zero. Okay, it just does not have the same effect. And I said, that's not going to work. Also that morning, the internal surgeon came in to start removing the tubes. And especially when they removed the chest tube. And it had about 100 feet inside of me because that's what it felt like. The doctor got up on the side of the bed, wrapped the tube around his hand, and said, okay, take a breath. So I took a breath, he went, like starting a lawnmower, and pulled it out. That hurt like all get out. And then he put a Band-Aid, a couple stitches, and stuff like that. And so anyway, I'm in the room now with Tylenol and codeine after having morphine. And it just did not work. So that late morning, early afternoon, I checked myself out of the hospital. I called my buddy. I said, come get me. I'm going home. And I lived alone, except for my dog. So my buddy Rick came and got me. And I have a picture somewhere at home of them wheeling me out of the hospital. My right leg is in a brace all the way up to my hip. I'm in one of those ungodly neck collared, thing. I have another word for it, but I won't use it because I'm in church. And I'm taped from here to here. My entire chest is taped and stuff like that. I'm in a world of hurt, but I ain't staying in the hospital no more. So he drove me home, and that afternoon, when I went home, or that night, I began my own self-medication process. Again, there was no such thing as TBI known at the time. No counseling, no caretaker, no nothing. Me at home. Okay? So I started taking my Tylenol and codeine and Jack Daniels at night. And I would do a big bottle a day. Okay? In the daytime, I didn't want to drink Jack Daniels all the time. So in the daytime, I would do Bud Light and Tylenol and codeine. So I would do at least a 12-pack a day. Because all I was doing was sitting around home. I had nothing. Okay? And that started the demons. Okay? So that began my circular drain going down the drain. Okay? Next slide, please. PTSD was not a factor. It was unknown. The military may have had experience with PTSD at the time, but in the civilian world, it was totally unknown. The hardest part of recovery was not the physical pain. I could deal with the physical pain. It was that mental stuff that started to creep in. And just a few of my stressors were possible loss of my career. I had worked my hiney off to keep my career and to have a stellar career. Loss of a girlfriend. You saw her in the video. We were in the process of breaking up and stuff, so she was in the wind. Injury and eventual loss of my canine partner. Extended alone time, and that was the hardest part, is being alone. Future surgeries and extensive and painful physical therapy. Okay? And the questioning of why and how did I survive? I couldn't answer the question. Why was I still there? I had no answer. Couldn't find it. So that cycle continued. Next slide, please. At home, I was self-medicating and I was depressed for several months. No home visits by anybody from the department except for my buddy Rick. Because what happened, you're a cop, you're strong. You don't have to go, hold somebody's hand, or you don't have to go help your fellow out, or your fellow officer out, or something like that. That was really not heard of at the time. So access to the world's two worst things: booze and guns.
How about God?
Huh?
How about God? Did you have a God, a higher power?
I'm getting to that. We're going to get there. Okay? Because yes, the answer to the question is yes, eventually. I was raised Catholic. Okay? But I'm a very proud 2-day-a-year Catholic. Christmas and Easter. Okay? The rest of the time, it just wasn't part of my life. So I called my best friend Rick to say goodbye. I'm doing it. I loaded my 45, put it on the table, and my bottle of Jack Daniels, and I'd taken my pills and stuff like that. Called Rick, just, okay, bye, thanks. A few other kind words and stuff between partners. Rick came over, and we had a huge argument. He's calling me everything he can. I'm calling him everything I can call him. Okay. During the argument, Rick walked into my kitchen, which was off of my living room, saying something and stuff. I got so mad at him, I threw a beer bottle at him. Okay, full Bud Light. I wasted a good Bud Light. Okay, I threw it at him. He's in the kitchen. I threw it. He ducked. It missed him. It hit the kitchen window and didn't break. Okay, and instead landed right side up in a wide mouth coffee cup that was in my sink. And beer, splashed out of the top and stuff like that. And for that moment, we just looked at each other, and that broke it. That broke the stress. That one moment in time. And we both started to laugh and cry at the same time. And that was when I knew that something had to happen. Okay? So that, if you want to say, that's the first step of my road to recovery. Next slide. Again, PTSD and clinical psychologists and stuff like that that whole concept was new to law enforcement. Okay? But Dr. Larry Blum, I met Dr. Larry Blum and Dr. Cindy Wilbrock from the counseling group. I had arranged to go in and see my chief of police, and he made a commitment to me that as long as I wanted to work, if I could get medically cleared, I had a job. Huge, huge lift of a burden, okay? Family and friends, but Dr. Larry Blum and Dr. Cindy Wilbrock. Larry Blum is a weightlifting psychologist and stuff like that. His key to life was lifting weights and taking psyllium. And you'd have to sit into his presentation to understand how it would work and stuff. But he took me under his arm, held personal counseling sessions with me away from the department. He couldn't tell the department that I was being treated because I'd have been put on the rubber gun squad. Okay, same with Dr. Cindy Wilbrock. And Dr. Cindy Wilbrock and her group eventually established a link with our police department. And after roughly 1990, 1991 and stuff, anytime we had a critical incident, they were called and came in and started the debriefing process that was confidential, where it allowed officers to start opening up and talk about what they had just experienced, whether it was an officer-involved shooting, whether it was a death in the family or a death at work, especially if it was a death involving a child, where they had responded to it. And that's one of the most horrific things a police officer can do, is respond to a child death, whether it be auto accident, drowning, SIDS, or whatever. Huge, huge impact on officers, especially those of us that are fathers and stuff. So Dr. Cindy Wilbrock, her and Larry Blum, I credit the most with unscrambling, or beginning to unscramble my brain. Next slide, please. Lessons learned. I could not understand why I was a survivor. Why was I left to be here? Learning that I can and I will survive. That I needed to talk to someone that would not judge me, and that was the main thing for law enforcement. And I can't speak for firefighters, okay? But for law enforcement, the hardest thing to do is to get a cop to talk about something like this. We talk all the time. We're great at telling war stories or sea stories, whatever title you want to do that. But when it comes to talking about us, we don't do that. It's difficult. Sometimes she has a hard time trying to get me to talk, especially when we're driving, like yesterday, driving up from Orange County. I probably went a couple, 3 hours without saying a word. So again, cops don't talk about this, okay? Discovering that there is a tomorrow. Finding the humor where there is none. That's that graveyard humor aspect, which gets us into a lot of trouble, okay? Especially now in a day of open mics, okay? Where we say something that maybe we shouldn't say, but because of the stress of the situation, we say it anyway, and it turns around and bites us in the hind end because somebody say, oh, you guys are so mean, you're uncaring, you're callous, you need to lose your job, whatever it might be, okay? Returning to work was vital. The love and support of family, friends, and colleagues cannot be understated, okay? They play an important role in the recovery process. Learning to live with the incident mentally and when the demons come. And I say that because I still have demons. They come every day. Every day, my demons come. It's how do I handle those demons? Okay? And that God had a path for me. Okay? And I'm still not at the end of that path. I'm still a work in progress. Okay? Next slide, please. The point is, I am not a hero. I'm a survivor. There's a big difference between the two. The lessons I've learned was that talking about what happened and the finding the graveyard humor helps me deal with the stressors. And it gives me the ability to show others that they can survive. You just got to have the path. Sometimes you got to give the path, and people had to give me the path. I've learned that mental toughness is just as important as physical toughness. I was a tough guy. In some aspects, I still am, okay, because I still run towards the fire. But that reaching out for others is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of help, and it shows your will to survive. Next slide, please. Most asked questions. The suspects. They were two hardcore gang members out on parole. Okay, anyway, they were gang members out on parole. I already explained what happened to my canine partner. I already explained what happened to my girlfriend. What happened to my friend Rick? A few years later, my friend Rick left the Alhambra Police Department and went to Roseville to work in Roseville and suffered a massive heart attack in his garage. He was a 2.5 to 3 pack a day smoker, and he didn't drink, but he smoked, and had a massive heart attack in his garage and died. And I was fortunate enough to have the honor to give the eulogy at his funeral, because he meant that much to me. Why didn't I retire on a medical? Back then, if you'd have went out on a medical, it was nothing compared to what it would be now. I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in right now had I retired on the medical. I certainly wouldn't be in the military. Most likely I wouldn't have my wife. I don't know what I would be doing. And I wasn't ready to give up and retire on a medical. I can retire today if I wanted to on a medical. I can tell you now when the weather's going to change 48 hours in advance, just because the bones ache, arthritis and stuff like that. But I have to keep going. That's who I am. And what do I do to keep my demons away? And that's where talking to God. Okay, now I'm not a deeply religious person. Okay, although I admit I'm Catholic, but I don't go to church that often. A lot of the stuff I've forgotten over the years of that. But I talk to God a lot. And mostly is when I talk to him is when I'm on my bike. Please, Lord, keep me safe. Because if you ride a bike in Southern California area on city streets, you're a target. So I talk to God. I'm not praying, but I'm not good. I'm not good at praying, but I'm a good talker. So I just hold a conversation. To me, it's easier. It comes easier that way. I work out, I ride my bike, and I volunteer. Okay, do I still drink? Yes. Not nearly as much. But yeah, I'll have a cocktail. I still like Jack and Ginger. I still like my Bud Light. I really like Jameson. But, it's under control. Part of the reason is I have her. She keeps me under control. And I know when I've had enough and stuff. So yes, I've not given up drinking. Talking about being on my bike ride, and there's always a commercial in everything we do. So this is the commercial. Okay, I have flyers. Part of the things I train for is what's called the Unity Tour, Police Unity Tour. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. It's a endurance bike ride for the National Memorial. And in 3 days, I will ride roughly 263 miles from Somerset, New Jersey to Washington, D.C. And I ride in honor of my fallen officer. And it's a fundraiser. And so I brought flyers. If you want to, you can. If you don't, that's fine. But that's what I train for. And that's when I pray the most or talk to God the most. When I'm out riding on the road, when I'm going up a hill. Like, please, God, get me over this hill. Or when I'm going down a hill and I'm going a little bit too fast, okay, and that scares the bejesus out of you. So I talk to God a lot. Next slide. And on behalf of all first responders, I want to thank you. Okay, thank you for your support. Thank you, families and friends. Thank you for having me here today. It's been an honor to be here with you all. Next slide. That's the link to our National Memorial. Go ahead, next slide. And that's my flyer that I have copies of. This is kind of fun. That's the front of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Obviously myself with an Alhambra patch. That's last year. The lower left-hand corner are two of the loves of my life, which is another reason why I'm a survivor. Because this woman gave me a beautiful daughter who gave me two of the most best grandchildren I've ever had, or you could ever have. And being a grandpa is the best job I could ever imagine. So I live for those two. That helps keep the demons away. And the lower right-hand corner is me as part of the Honor Guard at the National Memorial on Memorial Day, on May 15th of every year. Any questions? That's it. How can I answer any questions? I got my second dog because I was off work. It was maybe about 2.5 years. I was off work about 1.5 years. And what would happen is I would go off work, have surgery, work my way back through physical therapy, and then go back to work. Okay, and I did that several times. And kind of a side war story about that is, again, why I didn't want to retire on a medical and stuff. We had a city personnel director at the time who was not very friendly to personnel. And he wanted to force retire anybody that had a disability or had an injury. And he tried to force retire me. But he couldn't, because he wrote the policy that says that if you could not work patrol, you could not continue your career, putting in legalese and stuff like that. And when he posted that or published that policy, he says, "Haha, you can't fire me. I've been back to patrol." And he said, "No, you haven't. You've been on light duty." I said, "No, I have not. I've been back on patrol, and I had been assigned to detectives and stuff." So he kind of had to eat, those words. So again, about 2.5 years later, I got my second dog, who was Zoltan, and he was a Belgian Malinois. And you might have seen them on TV and stuff like that. Relatively new, at that time, new to law enforcement. They were from Belgium. Not bred for police work. These were working dogs. And he was a low-flying, heat-seeking missile out on the street. But my greatest fear was ever coming across a bad guy with a tennis ball, because I was losing. because he would eat tennis balls. And I had him for about 2 years until the department terminated the canine program after the Rodney King incident. And at the time, the police departments cut most anything that had liability related to it. And the canine program was one of the greatest liabilities police departments had at the time. So they got rid of it and retired him. But now I have a dog. I have 3 dogs, in fact. They're daddy's lap dogs.
Yeah, Jack Russell's my favorite.
Any other thing I can answer?
Have probably been through some kind of a critical incident. And in that incident, and I want to emphasize the caregivers and the family around them. Person who's
That's patience. Don't give up on us. No matter how obnoxious we become or whatever, don't give up on us. You may have to step away, for a short time or something like that, but maintain the contact, patience. For the first part of the question is, how do you deal with the demons? You have to find a path, because not every path is the same. Not everybody could go through this the way I did, come out the way I did. And I am by no means saying I'm doing it the right way. Okay, I'm fortunate that I get to continue my career. I get to serve in the military and stuff like that. But it may not be the path for everybody. We're all different, and it's finding that anchor, finding that thing to hang on to, but not hang on so tight as you strangle it. Because we're still going to fall. We're still going to have tough days. Okay? Obviously, when you're hurt, the days are tougher. Okay? And one thing I would avoid is telling somebody you can't do something. Because I know when somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm gonna do it. Okay? It's like the bike ride that I'm doing. And so if people say, you're too old. Okay? Because I'm 70. Okay? They say, you're too old to do that. Okay, I'll show you. And I'll ride faster and longer than most of you will. So if somebody tells me I can't do something, unless it's her, if she says I can't do something, I don't do it. But any type of physical barrier or something like that, I'm going to find a way around it. Learn to take one step at a time, one day at a time, one cycle at a time, one event at a time. Because a lot of what happens is it's mass, it's piling on. One thing compounds another and stuff. So you have the injury, then you got the finances, then you got your family, then you got this, then you got that, and you got that, and everything compounds. And sometimes you just seem like, or I felt that there's no way out. Okay, I'm not going to get beyond that. So learning to take small steps, learning to live with a setback when you fall back, and picking yourself back up again, and keep moving forward. Always keep moving forward. And I don't know who made the analogy or not, but it's like eating an elephant. Okay, one bite at a time. Okay, and eventually we'll get there. And like I say, I'm still a work in progress. I am by no means perfect or totally cured or anything like that. This is something that's going to live with me for the rest of my life. I'm going to live with my injuries. I'm going to live with my doubts. I'm going to live with my demons. And part of the key is knowing that they're there, and not ignoring them. Anything else?
Yeah, one question for you. You talked a lot about the mental aspect of it and the doctors being able to help you on that side of it. Did you find that you got some just as equally amount of assistance through the physical therapy side too? Or was that something more you had to champion on your own?
Yes. One, it depended on the therapist. Okay. If I had a physical therapist that kind of made it seem like I was imposing on them, or they weren't really bought into what they were doing, or they had to do it, or whatever, or maybe I wasn't the best patient and they really didn't want to deal with me. Or if I had a physical therapist that really championed what I was trying to do. I was very fortunate that the Dr. Plunkett, again, he was the orthopedic surgeon. He convinced, and I don't know how he was able to do this. He convinced the city to pay for me to go to a private gym. There's a guy, it's no longer there, but a guy named Doug Brignoli. He was a weightlifting champion and stuff like that, and he owned a gym in Pasadena. And he somehow convinced the city, says, I want him to go to him for physical therapy. And the city said, okay. So they did it. And I had a private therapist for about 8 months. And it was 8 months of torture. Because he would put me on machines, put me on a rack, hang me upside down, put me on a bike, a stationary bike, put me on a treadmill, and massage and heat and ice and typical stuff like, say, an NFL player would go through to rehab. And that really, really helped. And I've had some great therapists since. And it just depends if they've bought into the treatment and they really want to help, it's been a good experience. Far more than any bad. But it hurts. You have to learn to work through the pain. Pain is good, and pain purifies. That was the thing we learned in the academy. Hurt is good, pain purifies. Anything else? Again, I want to thank you for letting me do this. This was my first time doing this. I'm going to do it again tomorrow for your regular congregation. But I truly appreciated this. By the way, I love your town. It reminds me of my hometown, Nevada City. Your downtown reminds me of Broad Street in Nevada City, if you've never been there. So again, thank you, and
If there's any other questions, just so live stream can hear, I'll take a mic to you. I think this was the best thing is, in all of these incidents, there's always a learning opportunity. And I didn't want to, when Joe first told me this story, because I knew him for a long time before he ever told me this story. And as soon as he did, I knew that we needed to bring it here because there's people that could really benefit from it. They could learn from it. They could learn and see the things that he's gone through. But equally important is the people around someone that went through an incident, because it's very difficult to understand it. And sometimes it's kind of like our faith. We just have to step out in faith, because you're not going to understand what it is, but through someone like Joe that shares what he's gone through, maybe you can kind of understand what he's been through, and then understand the person you're trying to support, and knowing there is no right answer.
No, there's not. And I've been wrong a lot. But I need to learn when I'm wrong, and take that as a learning lesson, and try not to do the wrong twice. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But fortunately, I've a family that loves me. That is probably the best keys. I have a wife that tolerates me the best she can, and sometimes that's a huge burden, is trying to tolerate me. I'm a stubborn Irishman, and it kind of gets in the way sometimes. But I have a daughter that loves me to death. I have 2 grandchildren that love me to death. When I need an anchor, they're my anchor. And I honestly would not do anything now that would cause them pain. And had I succeeded in what I was going to do, I wouldn't have that. So I'm very, very thankful that I have that the good Lord brought me through it and gave me what I have, and now I appreciate it. So whenever the demons come now, or anything like that, I think of the people that would be hurt. Suicide is a permanent solution to a short-term problem. Okay, and we have to get through it. And I know that vets suffer through it, through now PTSD, because it's known now. It's a known element. And one of the things I enjoy most is I get to go down and work with some vets. One of the restaurants in our community does a Christmas dinner where we feed vets dinner down at Long Beach Veterans Hospital. And I'm down there a lot with my work. And so I get to talk to vets. And sometimes just having somebody to talk to means a lot to them.
Is there any other questions? We've got, I wanted to thank Joe for coming here. He came all the way down up here from, although I would admit, it's really not hard to come up here from LA. It probably is going to be more difficult to go back to LA, but maybe we're a little biased up here.
I forgot part of the story. People ask what happened to the suspects. I apologize, I forgot to include that. They basically walked. They were not charged with any crime. Because they were both on parole, they were being held at Chino State Prison on a parole violation. And the case sat on our filing district attorney's desk. And it's kind of ironic that now I work for the district attorney's office. But in January of '89, our district attorney at the time, Ira Reiner, was going to run for attorney general. And he came to Sacramento to make a pitch to get an endorsement from law enforcement. And I was sitting at the table. And I was still on crutches and had leg brace on. He basically talked about how great the DA's office was for protecting police officers and blah, 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 blah. And the special unit that prosecutes crimes against police officers and stuff like that, and it's called CAPOS. And it's still there. The division is still there. They only, at the time, investigated officer fatalities. If the officer survived an attack, it was left to the local filing deputy in our case, it was the Alhambra Courthouse. And so him and I literally had words. And they weren't nice words. Now I'm just a lowly police officer, and I'm in a verbal argument with the district attorney of the county of Los Angeles. And he's telling me that what I'm telling him was a lie, that it never happened. Until he went home that afternoon and sent his head deputy out to the Alhambra Courthouse, and I won't mention the name of the filing DA that was there, but he walked in, and I know that this story is true because the head of the office, the secretaries in the office, was the wife of one of our motor officers. And so she could hear the ruckus in the office. And he basically asked her, what's going on with this Flannagan case? And she said, nothing, he lived. There's nothing to file. And the case was sitting on her desk. It had been sitting there for several months. And he said, well, why haven't you filed it? I mean, the robbery, the GTA and stuff like that. Well, he lived. What's there to file? So she was immediately removed from that position. And the chief of staff went to my police department and asked to send 2 detectives out to Chino Prison, bring the guys in for arraignment for the next day. And they appeared before Judge Martinez, who was a great judge, and knowing him a long time. And during their arraignment, their court-appointed attorney made a motion to dismiss for lack of prosecution. And it was granted because the charges had never been filed. And so they were returned to prison to finish out their parole, but they were never criminally charged for my incident. And when they finished parole, about 8 months later, they were both rearrested again for residential burglary. But that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Please stick around. We've got food out here. You can go out the back. There's some places to sit there. There's places to sit in here. Make yourself at home. Coffee, iced tea, and some wonderful sandwiches. Give you a chance to talk to Joe if you'd like to. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.